Sean Diddy Combs has been denied bail after the verdict in his sex trafficking case, and here's how he took the news. According to NBC News reporters in the courtroom, Combs appeared, quote, deflated as his hopes of going home were seemingly dashed as his lawyers attempted to convince Judge Aaron Subramanian to release their client ahead of his sentencing. In his ruling, Subramanian cited Combs' years-long pattern of violence as a reason for him to remain behind bars.
They thought he had a chance. That maybe, just maybe, the courtroom might show mercy. After all, a few of the charges didn't stick. The jury had hesitated on some counts. A glimmer of hope, his team whispered. A narrow path to freedom.
And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of, and all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury. So today is a great day. Today is a win. Today is a victory of all victories for Sean Combs and our legal team. And I want...
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant, because federal bail and state bail are two different things. State bail was most of the bails that I write. Federal bail, they don't need a bondsman. They do go through pretrial services, but a lot of times major attorneys will bring me in to consult because they'll be denied and they'll say, hey, what do we do? So in this case with Puffy, I got brought in and we talked about possibly renting out his plane and keeping it in Honolulu. We talked about surrendering his passport, his family's passports. We talked about putting up his house. We talked about private security 24/7. We talked about a call log seat to see who's gonna call him, also who's gonna come see him, who's gonna come in, who's gonna come out, letting the government see what they have. So if anybody walks in to see him, they know exactly who's coming to see him. So a bondsman basically puts it together. In a lot of words, I'm a legal loan shark.
Now the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him.
But that illusion shattered the moment the judge re-entered the courtroom with that cold, unreadable expression. The crowd quieted. Reporters leaned in. Diddy sat still, lips pursed, eyes darting from the judge to his lawyer. And then came the blow. In light of the overall findings and the continued concern for witness security and procedural integrity, bail is once again denied. That was it. Simple, final, devastating. Diddy blinked slowly like he hadn't heard it right. He turned to his legal team. One of them mouthed, "I'm sorry." The other shook his head, lips tight. The room erupted into murmurs, gasps, disbelief. Diddy didn't stay composed this time. He slammed his palm against the defense table. Papers scattered. The judge didn't flinch. The bailiff stepped forward. His attorney tried to calm him down, whispering, "Not here, not now." But it was too late. The courtroom was watching. The cameras captured every twitch, every glare, every breakdown. What was once a man of poise, power, and polished image had now turned into a spectacle of rage and desperation. His outburst wasn't about that one decision. It was about everything. The walls closing in, the empire crumbling, the people he thought were loyal turning silent, the secrets no longer protected, the witnesses he thought would never speak, finally finding their voices. And now, no bail.
At the top of the show that we didn't announce that Sean Combs walked out of this courthouse. I think it was kind of a little bit of a spoiler for the viewers here that the judge decided to keep him behind bars until his sentencing hearing. So I did see kind of a little bit of disappointment from both Sean Combs and his family after the judge made his decision. So the judge said that the jury convicted the defendant on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act. He says bail is denied because the government correctly noted that detention is mandatory and it's not appropriate for Sean Combs to be released on bail given the charges that he's still been convicted of. And so the judge says that they disagree with the defense's argument, saying that any felony under 117, and Jesse, you probably know that more than me, requires detention. And he said even if the defendant is required to not be likely to present a danger to the community, the judge even kind of pointing out just some of what we had heard during the trial where the defense conceded that the defendant, Sean Combs, was violent. The judge said, "We own the domestic violence." That was a word that he took from the transcript because Mark Agnifilo had said that in open court. He told the jurors that, and he told them that multiple times. And the judge pointed it out multiple times from the transcript. He says that the defendant's concession as to domestic violence wasn't necessary. He pointed out Mark Agnifilo's closing where he says it's horrible for Miss Ventura what she had gone through and that domestic violence is the issue, kind of even pointing to her Instagram statement that she had made after the 2016 video was released on CNN. And again, the judge was saying that the video is very much domestic violence, even kind of pointing to the London hotel incident, saying where Mark Agnifilo had pointed out that obviously something happened, that he was violent at times, and that conceding the defendant's violence, that he even poses no danger, that he was pointing to violence happened after the HSI raids in March of 2024, because they kind of pointed to what had happened to Jane just a couple months after, and pointing back to the June 2024 incident, which was just a little more than a year ago to this day. And so for those reasons and just some more reasons too, the judge decided that the defendant will remain behind bars pending his sentencing.
And yeah, I looked at the government's letter and they were like, they talked about violence, they talked about drug use, they talked about the abuse of Cassie, that you have multiple victims in this case, that he used the staff to carry out these transportation to engage in prostitution crimes, that he tried to obstruct justice with respect to these crimes, that under the Bail Reformed Act, they argued this was a crime of violence, that he poses a serious risk of flight, a danger to the community. So clearly it seems that the judge was persuaded by that. The judge did mention something really, really interesting, because somebody would listen to this and say, oh my gosh, he's going to throw the book at him. He actually said the court takes no position on what it will consider at sentencing, nor what sentence it will impose. However, we kind of got a little bit of a preview of what a potential sentence could be, right? We kind of got an idea of what the defense is advocating and what the government is advocating.
Yeah, so what the defense was kind of advocating for was anywhere between the guidelines of 21 to 27 months behind bars. So if you think about Sean Combs and his time that he served, he's nearly at a year. So if the judge were to go for the defense's route, he could be out within a year. Whereas the government was like, okay, no, under the guidelines, it's really 51 to 61 months. So from the government's point of view, Jesse, it seems like there is kind of a disagreement as to how long the defendant should serve as far as his time goes, but either way he'll still have time served. And so depending on whether it's 51 to 61 months or like the defense wants 21 to 27 months, it'll ultimately be up to the judge to make that decision.
And didn't the prosecutor say something about a pre-sentencing investigation report? And just to give everybody an idea about what that is, that...
Again, the judge stood firm. This court has been consistent. The risk factors have not diminished. In fact, additional concerns have come to light. This is not about punishing wealth or fame. It's about the rule of law. Diddy was led out of the room, his head low. Not a word from him. No comments for the press. No look back. Only the sound of shackles echoing down the corridor. Outside, it was mayhem. Protesters screamed, supporters wept, critics celebrated. The media spun its narrative, headlines screaming from every screen. But behind those metal doors, Diddy was just another inmate. Stripped of title, stripped of power, waiting. The next 24 hours moved like molasses. Every hour in the holding cell stretched like a lifetime. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in court. Every word the judge uttered. Every gasp from the crowd. He wasn't used to being denied. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to hearing no. The jail guards didn't speak to him unless necessary. They didn't care who he was. They had seen celebrities come and go. He was just another face in a lineup of broken dreams. His cell was cold. Steel bed, thin blanket, flickering light overhead. A ticking clock that seemed to mock him. Time moved differently here. Slower, crueler. He was alone. No lawyers, no assistants, no entourage. Just silence. And silence had never been his friend. He tried to pace, tried to focus, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. Every accusation, every headline, every betrayal. It was
That was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really gonna watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. Things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered, he wanted out right away. Plaxico burst. When that happened, we were talking, and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money, get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his ex-wife now, coming in.
All hitting him now. Raw, real, unfiltered. He remembered the nights when he felt untouchable. The champagne, the crowds, the music blasting through penthouse speakers, the parties that didn't end until the sun came up, the phone calls he never returned, the warnings he ignored. It all felt like another life. Because it was. Back in the courtroom, the legal team scrambled. Another appeal? A last-ditch request? Anything to buy time. But the judges were growing tired. The system had given him more than enough chances. And now, with the bail denied again, all eyes were on the next phase. Sentencing. The prosecution was preparing to go for the maximum. They had stacks of evidence, dozens of testimonies. They knew the world was watching. Meanwhile, the defense tried to find a crack in the wall. A technicality. A loophole. Something. Anything. But even they knew they were running out of magic. Diddy's team reached out to old allies, former partners, industry giants. But the calls weren't returned. The texts stayed unread. Nobody wanted to be associated. Nobody wanted to go down with him. That night, inside the jail, a guard overheard Diddy talking to himself. Low voice, repeating the judge's words, over and over again. Denied, denied, denied. He sat in the corner of the cell, staring at the floor. This was no longer about avoiding a sentence. It was about surviving the fall. Because the empire had collapsed, and in the rubble there was no stage, no mic, no beat. Just a man stripped bare by the truth. The press conference came the next day.
We're supposed to say everything was consensual, and then it's sex trafficking? Was that a standout moment to you?
Yeah, it was a lot of standout moments from the defense's closing argument, right? So, for example, Mark Agnifilo, by the way, everyone, when you're seeing him in action giving the closing argument for the defense, it's very opposite from the prosecution, where he is just really animated. He's going back and forth, walking back and forth. Sometimes there were points he was away from the microphone, so you could barely hear him. He's using poster boards. He's using paper forms of text exhibits, really kind of putting on a lot of demonstratives. But right off the bat, he was saying this trial is a tale of two trials. First trial is the witnesses, the videos, the text messages, the evidence. And the second trial is just what is being told to the jury by the prosecution. And so Mark Agnifilo saying right off the top that this case is badly exaggerated. It's made up, in other words. Those were literally the words he used. And then when he was talking about drugs, he said it's personal use drugs, nothing else. He says that the evidence shows that it's swingers and threesomes. But I think one big thing, Jesse, is that I think really from the defense's perspective, they were really kind of driving the point that, yes, Sean Combs has done bad things, right? But they say, is it sex trafficking? So, for example, really kind of pointing to that they think it's a domestic violence issue. That's really the issue, especially when it comes to count two, that being related to Cassie. But one thing I noted during his defense closing is that he brought the CNN video up, and he was kind of talking about a particular Instagram post that Cassandra Ventura Fine had made after this video was released and after she got an outpouring of support, where she had said that domestic violence is the issue. So the defense really kind of using her words against her, where they were like, okay, well, she didn't say sex trafficking was the heart of the issue. She didn't say that this was the heart of the issue. She specifically said that domestic violence is the issue. And so the defense said that Cassie could have said sex trafficking. She could have said coercion and running away from freak-offs was the issue. But Mark Agnifilo told the jury that, again, Cassie believed it to be domestic violence. And so the defense saying that they weren't going to be putting up a bunch of charts and text messages, etc. But I think we're kind of trying to drive the point too that Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs were in a loving relationship, and at points it was toxic, something that's kind of been a theme throughout their cross-examination too of particular witnesses. And then even as it came to Jane and just kind of the allegations Jane has made, the defense really kind of pointing out that Jane is still getting her rent paid for by Sean Combs, that he had kind of helped her when she was going through like a bad child child support type of situation, that her child's father wasn't pulling his weight in terms of just the money that he was giving to her and their child together, and that it was Sean Combs who stepped up. He was the one who provided the roof over their head. He was the one that continues to pay for her rent, even to this day, but also for her lawyer even to this day too. And I think what also is interesting, Jesse, is in my mind, I'm wondering, does the jury kind of want to know, why didn't the defense put up any type of witnesses?
Prosecutors were blunt. We maintain our position that the accused remains a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. The reporters didn't even flinch. They had heard it all before. But the headlines wrote themselves. Diddy's face splashed across every screen. No bail, again. His family visited later that week. It wasn't emotional. It was quiet. They sat across from him, separated by a glass wall. They didn't cry. They didn't yell. They just looked at him like they didn't recognize him. And maybe they didn't. Because the man they remembered, the confident mogul, the smiling public figure, was gone. What sat before them was a shell. One who now understood that influence means nothing when the gavel comes down. No bail. No breaks. Just judgment. He was escorted back to his cell without a word. The halls were quiet. Even the guards didn't speak. The silence had become routine. Inside his cell, he tried to sleep. But sleep never came. Just memories, regret, and the haunting echo of that word. Denied. The world moved on. New scandals, new stories. But Diddy remained trapped in the same cycle. Hearing after hearing. Denial after denial. Until finally, the date was set. Sentencing. One last time he would stand before the court. One last chance to speak. One last gavel. And everyone knew, whatever came next, there would be no mercy left. Because this wasn't just a verdict. This wasn't just another bail denial. This was the dismantling of a legacy. And no amount of money, fame, or influence could stop it. The reckoning had arrived, and it wasn't done yet.